Dear students of ICSE class 10, today I am going to start your history syllabus, and the first chapter of your history is the First War of Independence 1857. See students, I know a large number of you find history quite a boring subject because you have to mug up a lot of dates and names and sequence of events and so on and so forth. But my advice to you would be, before you go into mugging up a particular chapter, please go through the chapter line by line as you would go through a story, and try to first jot down the points. Try to first put to your mind, commit to memory the sequence of events, the exact events that are discussed in that chapter, and try to remember the story first. Then try to go in, then try to mug up the dates and all those things that you require for your exams. See friends, the First War of Independence 1857, but I shall begin my discussion from the year 1757, exactly 100 years earlier. What was the major event that took place in 1757? You must have read in your earlier classes that in 1757, the Battle of Plassey was fought between the Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Daulah, and the army of the East India Company led by Robert Clive. This was the first, you must remember that Bengal was at that time the largest and the richest province of India. And after Robert Clive, after the East India Company defeated the Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Daulah, and in his place installed a puppet Nawab, Mir Jafar, they started milking the wealth of Bengal, and it was the first major political success that they tasted in India. And you can say that the rise of the political power of the East India Company, of the English East India Company in India, began from their resounding victory in the Battle of Plassey. Next we come to 1764, when the then Nawab of Bengal, the Nawab of Awadh, and the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II came together to challenge the British authority. And in the battle that was fought at Buxar in 1764, once again, the British inflicted a resounding defeat on these three major Indian powers: the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam II, the Nawab of Awadh, and the Nawab of Bengal. Following this, in 1765, according to the terms of the Treaty of Allahabad, the British East India Company, the English East India Company, was given the Diwani of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. Diwani means the right to collect taxes. And they were also given special trading rights in Bengal, and all this filled the coffers of the East India Company, made the East India Company extremely rich. And this wealth which they got from the province of Bengal, they used to expand their empire in other parts of India. Friends, between 1767 and 1748, see, apart from Bengal and Awadh, the other major political powers in India at that time were the Marathas in the west, Mysore in the south, Punjab in the north, and also the Nizam of Hyderabad. Between 1767 and 1799, 4 Anglo-Mysore wars were fought, and at the end of it, Tipu Sultan was defeated and killed, and large areas, Mysore was subjugated, and large areas of Mysore was included within the territory of the English East India Company. Between 1775 and 1818, again, 3 Anglo-Maratha wars were fought, and the Marathas were brought to their knees. In 1798, the Nizam of Hyderabad signed the Treaty of Subsidiary Alliance, with the British, and in 1849, Punjab was annexed. So by 1857, before the revolt of 1857 broke out, the British had certainly become the supreme masters of India. There was not a single political power left in India that had the might to challenge the authority of the British. It is in this scenario that the Great Revolt of 1857 took place. Now, as to the Great Revolt of 1857, it is called by various names. Indian historians, Indian nationalists, Indian revolutionaries, they referred to the Great Revolt as the first war of independence. Whereas many British writers, British historians called it a mere Sepoy mutiny. Then again, there were people who referred to the the Great Rebellion as a last-ditch attempt by the Indian feudal class. Feudal class means Indian princes, kings, zamindars, large landowners, as a large-ditch attempt by the Indian feudal class, the Indian feudals to regain and retain their power in India. Whatever may be the nature of the Great Revolt, you cannot deny the fact that the Great Revolt shook the British authority in India to its very roots. And for a time, it even looked as if the British authority, British rule in India was about to come to an end. Now, friends, let us discuss about the reasons, the various causes that led to this Great Revolt of 1857. We can divide the causes of the Great Rebellion into certain parts. So let us discuss the first of these causes, that is political causes. The first causes are the political causes. Under this heading of political causes, we can first discuss about the doctrine of lapse. Now, what is this doctrine of lapse? See, in those days, it had been an age-old custom among the Indian rulers to adopt a son if they did not have a natural heir. But Lord Dalhousie passed a resolution saying that no Indian ruler would be allowed to adopt the heir of any Indian ruler who did not have a natural heir, who did not have a son of his own, would not be allowed to adopt an heir without the permission of the East India Company. And if he did so, this heir would not be recognized. The kingdom would not automatically pass to this heir. This heir would be allowed to keep the personal property of the ruler, but the kingdom would go into British hands. Under the doctrine of lapse, many kingdoms like Nagpur, Satara, Jhansi, etc. fell into British hands. See, among these states, let us discuss about Jhansi, because Jhansi played a very important role in the Great Rebellion of 1857. When the ruler of Jhansi died in 1853, his adopted son Anand Rao was not recognized by the British, and the British took control of Jhansi. This shocked the Indian rulers and spread great discontent among them, and even the people at large became, not only the princes, not only the Indian rulers, but even the people at large became great enemies of the East India Company. Then we come to the discourtesy shown to the Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar. The last Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar, see, Mughals had practically lost all their authority by the time Bahadur Shah Zafar became the Mughal Emperor. In fact, it was said in those days that the authority of the Mughal Emperor ran only within the four walls of the Red Fort. Whatever. Despite the loss of power, the Mughal Emperor did not lose his prestige. The Muslims, and not only the Muslims, even the Hindu rulers held, even the Hindu people, even the Hindus held the Mughal Emperor in great respect, great regard. In fact, in those days, even the East India Company ruled in India in the name of the Mughal Emperor. But Lord Dalhousie declared that after the death of Bahadur Shah, his sons would not be given the title of the Mughal Emperor. His sons would not be allowed to use the imperial title, and they were also ordered to vacate the Red Fort and shift to a palace in Mehrauli. This discourtesy shown to the Mughal emperor angered the Muslims as well as the Hindus of India. Next, see the last Peshwa Bajirao II, who had accepted the subsidiary allowance and was enjoying a handsome pension from the British. He had no heir of his own and he adopted, and Nana Sahib was his adopted son. After the death of Peshwa Bajirao II, Nana Sahib inherited great wealth from the Peshwa, but the British, because Nana Sahib was the Peshwa's adopted son, the British did not recognize Nana Sahib as the next Peshwa and they discontinued the pension that they paid to Bajirao II. Naturally, this angered Nana Sahib to a great extent and he began to use his wealth and power and prestige to instigate rebellion against the British in different parts of India. Next, we come to Awadh. Following the defeat of Awadh in the Battle of Buxar in 1764, Awadh had entered into a subsidiary alliance with the English. And Awadh had remained a very faithful ally of the British, helping them with money, men and other resources whenever the English demanded of them. In fact, they had given no cause of anger to the British, and even then, Lord Dalhousie on 7th February 1856 deposed, that is removed from the throne, Nawab Wajid Ali Shah on grounds of misgovernance. He brought this charge that Nawab Wajid Ali Shah was an incompetent ruler and was not able to rule his kingdom well, and Nawab Wajid Ali Shah was deposed and Awadh became a part of the British Empire. That is, it became a part of the territory of the English East India Company. Naturally, there was no logical reason to justify the annexation of Awadh, because Awadh had remained very loyal to the East India Company. Naturally, it appeared to the Indian rulers that the English did not care for any treaties. They could break any pledge, any treaty whenever they wanted, and they could not be trusted. And this caused a great anger and resentment and fear among the Indian princes. Secondly, next, see, the British administration was also very unpopular among the Indian people. Number one, the Indian people could not approach, whenever the Indian people were in some trouble, it was very difficult for them to approach the English officials. Secondly, the new administrative system, the English courts and the other administrative systems that were put in place were very difficult to understand for the common Indian men, for the common Indian masses, because of their lack of knowledge of English. When they went to the courts conducted their business in English, and the common masses had no knowledge of English. So you can well imagine the difficulty they must have been. They were totally unaware, these English officials, they were totally unaware of the customs, the manners, the beliefs of the people that they were governing. Third, see, Indians were totally excluded from high posts in the government, in the administration. Even the highly educated and capable Indians were not given any high post in the administration. So naturally, there was great resentment among them. Lastly, in 1857, there was a rumor, a gujob, মানুষের মধ্যে ছড়িয়ে পড়লো, and what was that? No political authority in India remained in power for more than 100 years. So they believed that the British had come to power in India after their victory in the Battle of Plassey in 1757, and now 1857 had come, exactly 100 years had passed, and now it was the time for the British to go. So these were the political causes behind the revolt of 1857. Now we come to the religious and social causes. See, number one, there was a fear among the Hindus and Muslims that the British were out to convert India into a Christian land. And their fear was founded on many factors. Number one, in the many missionary schools, that is in the many schools that were set up by the Christians, not only in the Christian schools but also in the government schools, it became compulsory to read the Bible. The prisoners in jail were also forced to read the Bible. In fact, in many places, the police was used to forcibly convert Indians into Christianity. Sometimes in some places, the British officials openly went to temples and mosques to preach Christianity, and all this created a fear among the Indians that the British were out to convert India into a Christian country. Secondly, the British enacted many laws that interfered with the customs of the Indians. Number one, in 1835, Lord William Bentinck abolished the sati system. Then, in 1856, Lord Canning passed a law which made the remarriage of Hindu widows, which allowed the remarriage of Hindu widows. Again, female infanticide was made illegal. You must remember that this reform of sati system, Raja Rammohun Roy fought very hard to end the sati system. Vidyasagar fought very hard to get the government to introduce an act to enable the remarriage of Hindu widows. Keshav Chandra Sen and the Brahmo Samaj, they fought against female infanticide. So progressive Indians, Western educated Indians, did fight against all these social superstitions, but by and large, it appeared to the common Indian people, it appeared to the common Indians that the English was interfering with their age-old social customs and beliefs. In 1850, the British passed, earlier, any Hindu who converted to Christianity, any Hindu who left Hinduism and converted to another religion, was not allowed to inherit his father's property. But by an act of 1850, Hindus who left their father's religion and converted to other religions was also allowed to inherit his father's property. And the Hindus believed that through this act, the British were giving a direct encouragement for conversion into Christianity. Naturally, this caused great unrest among the people. Thirdly, the railways and the telegraph system was introduced in India during this time in the 1850s. In 1853, in fact, the first railway ran between Bombay and Thane. And since then, the railway network in India spread very rapidly. Now, Hindus, the upper caste Hindus, did not sit in the same room with the lower castes. But when they traveled by train, they had to sit in the same compartment with the lower caste people, and they believed that this was done by the British purposefully so that the upper caste Hindus would lose their caste. When telegraph posts came to be erected, there was a rumor that anybody who protested against the British would be hung from these telegraph posts. Lastly, the Englishmen in India humiliated and insulted the Indians whenever they liked. Indians were prohibited from clubs and other places where the British went. If no Indian was allowed to carry arms with him, though the English could do so. If an Indian was passing by on his horse and he came across an Englishman, he had to climb down from his horse and stand respectfully with bowed heads until the Englishman passed. The British often insulted the Indians, calling them dogs, hurling abuses like dogs and so on and so forth. All this made the Indians very, very angry. Now we come to the economic causes behind the Great Rebellion. When the British came to India, when the English came to India for the first time, you must remember that the English came to India to trade. The English were given the permission to trade with India by Emperor Jahangir. In the initial stages, the English would buy, at the time of the Mughal Emperor, at the time of the Mughal Empire, India was called the factory of the world. The British would buy Indian silk, indigo, and other items from India, spices, and make their profit by selling these articles in the European market. But after the Industrial Revolution, which took place around 1780, goods began to be produced in large scale in England, and England had to sell them in markets outside England and outside Europe, and so they began to dump their goods in the Indian market. What they did? They imposed heavy taxes on Indian handicraft industries, while the British could import their goods without paying any tax. Their goods were machine made, so because of mass production, the goods were as it is cheap. And because they did not have to pay any tax, the goods became much more cheaper. Comparatively, the goods produced by the Indian artisans were much more costly, and gradually these goods lost their markets, and thousands of artisans, they lost their jobs. Places like Murshidabad, Dhaka, Varanasi, they were very popular, very well known for their silk and textiles. But the handloom industries here gradually had to shut shop, and artisans were reduced to penury, to beggary. Again, the tax that the British collected from the Indians, they did not use it for the development of India, but rather they sent it back to England in various ways. So England was growing rich at the cost of India. They also purchased raw materials from India at a very cheap rate and sent them back to England. Furthermore, they introduced many new land revenue systems such as Mahalwari system, Rayatwari system, permanent settlement. And under all these new land revenue settlements, the Indian peasants had to pay land revenue at a much higher rate than they earlier used to do. Naturally, the Indian peasants were greatly harmed. Gradually, with the destruction of Indian industries, India was gradually reduced into nothing but an agricultural colony of the British. The British used India only to dump their industrial production, industrial goods, and to carry away raw materials from here at a cheap cost. In 1833, the Englishmen were permitted to acquire land in India and start indigo cultivation, which was a highly profitable trade at that time. The peasants of India were forced to cultivate indigo and nothing else in their field by the English planters. And when indigo was cultivated, they were not paid the proper market rate. And if any cultivator refused to cultivate indigo in their land, their crops were destroyed, their cattle were stolen, their houses were burned down, their women were mistreated, and thus great plunder was carried out. In the earlier days, the princes, the kings, the nawabs, they had granted rent-free land to the mosques, to the temples, and to various noblemen. All these landowners were deprived of their rent-free lands. Their rent-free lands were confiscated by the British. And this landed gentry, these gentlemen of India who lived off their land, they were reduced to beggary. Their condition was greatly reduced. Their condition was reduced to penury. This happened especially in Awadh after Awadh was annexed. The destruction of handicraft industries naturally led to the loss of livelihood for millions of Indians. When the Indian territories were annexed, when the British annexed Indian territories, what happened? Their army was disbanded. So naturally, thousands of soldiers who served in the armies of the Indian Nawabs and kings, they lost their jobs when their territory was annexed by the British. Handicraft artists, artisans, and many other people who depended on the patronage of the local kings and rulers also became unemployed when the British annexed the territory of those rulers. Naturally, there was great resentment among these people. When Awadh had a large standing army, when Awadh was annexed, the soldiers of the Awadh army became unemployed, and these unemployed soldiers joined the mutinous sepoys. When the sepoys mutinied, these unemployed soldiers of Awadh joined them in large numbers to avenge their loss of jobs. Apart from these, there were also some military causes behind the revolt of 1857. Number one, the army of the East India Company comprised mostly of Indian sepoys. And these Indian sepoys fought very bravely for the British. They had a big role to play in the grand victories that the British earned in India. Despite that, their salary remained very, very low, and they had no prospect of promotion. In fact, the maximum rank, the highest rank that an Indian sepoy could reach was only that of the Risaldar or the Subadar. Secondly, the distribution of troops was also faulty. For example, in very important towns like Delhi and Allahabad and Meerut and Kanpur, either there were no British troops, the army of the East India Company consisted almost wholly of Indian sepoys, or the number of British troops compared to the Indian sepoys was very, very low. At about that time, England was engaged in many other armed conflicts in China, in Persia, that is Iran. And so the Indian sepoys felt that this was the finest opportunity. This was the best time to strike at the English. Again, as I have told you, there were a large number of unemployed soldiers, especially in Awadh, and these soldiers joined the mutinous sepoys when the rebellion broke out. Furthermore, during the time of Lord Dalhousie, there were almost 233,000 Indian sepoys in the army of the East India Company, but the number of British troops, English troops, was only about 45,322. Naturally, there were not enough British soldiers in the army compared to Indian soldiers, and this gave the courage to the Indian soldiers to revolt against the British. Again, the British officers did not treat the Indian soldiers well. They never mixed with them. They kept a social distance from them and treated the Indian soldiers nothing more than as their servants. This also, so naturally, the Indian soldiers who sacrificed their lives for the British on the battlefield were greatly humiliated when they were looked down upon by their British officers. Again, the Bengal army, although this division of the army was known as Bengal army, but there were very few soldiers from Bengal in this army. The Bengal army mostly consisted of high caste Hindus, Brahmins and Rajputs, mostly from Awadh. The Bengal army of this division of the East India Company's army, which was known as the Bengal army, had soldiers who were mostly high caste, that is Hindus and Rajputs from Awadh. These people were forced, in those days, the upper caste Hindus thought that they would lose their religion if they crossed the seas and left the borders of India. But they were forced to undertake long sea voyage and fight in different parts of the world, such as in Africa. This angered, and the extra allowance given to them was also very petty. So naturally, this angered the soldiers of the Bengal army very much. Round about that time, the first Anglo-Afghan war was fought, and the British suffered a crushing defeat in the Anglo-Afghan war. And this encouraged the Indian sepoys, who felt that they too could defeat the English if they wanted, just as the Afghans had done. In 1856, the General Service Enlistment Act was passed. In 1856, the General Service Enlistment Act was passed, where it was written that the soldiers or the recruits of the Bengal army should be ready to serve anywhere within or within or outside India. This also caused a great alarm among the soldiers. Thus, all the gunpowder was ready for the blast, and what was needed was just a spark. And this spark was provided. That is the immediate cause. All these things had, they had collected, they had gathered in the minds of the Indians. They had caused great anger in the minds of the Indians. But the event that finally led to the outbreak of the war was the incident of the Enfield rifle. See, a new rifle was introduced in the army, which was called the Enfield rifle, in place of the old iron-made brown bess guns. The iron-made brown bess guns were replaced by the new Enfield rifles. Now the bullets or the cartridges of the Enfield rifle was covered with a leather skin, and this leather skin had to be bitten off before the bullet could be inserted into the rifle. Now there was a rumor that this leather was made of pig and cow. Now the Muslims looked upon the pig as a dirty animal and they did not eat pig, whereas the Hindus looked upon the cow as a holy animal and they did not eat cows. Therefore, both the Hindus and the Muslims soldiers felt that this was a purposeful attempt by the British to make them lose their religion, and therefore they revolted, they refused to use the Enfield rifle. Now, the events of the war, this is not included in your syllabus, but I'll give you a brief outline so that continuity is maintained. The revolt broke out for the first time on 29th March. The mutineers had planned to start the revolt on 31st March 1857, but much earlier, On 29th March 1857, the first spark of the revolt was felt when a sepoy of the Bengal army posted at Barakpur by the name of Mangal Pandey refused to use the Enfield rifle and tried and also killed two English officers. Mangal Pandey was hanged to death. There was also revolt or refusal to use the Enfield rifle in another army cantonment in Bengal, which was at Baharampur. The revolt finally broke out on 6th May at Meerut over the issue of punishment given to some Indian sepoys. These sepoys were sentenced to 10 years imprisonment and hard labor when they refused to use the Enfield cartridges on May 6th. On May 9th, their uniform was stripped from their backs, but the very next day, the other Indian soldiers broke out into revolt. They released their fellow mates, and many European officers were killed, and then they started their march to Delhi. On 11th March, these soldiers reached Delhi, where local soldiers joined them, and they chased the English away from Delhi and declared Bahadur Shah Zafar as the Mughal emperor and the emperor of India. But this victory was short-lived because on 7th August, Nicholson, an English general, arrived with sufficient forces, especially from Punjab, and on 20th September, Red Fort again fell into the hand of the English. The Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar, along with two of his sons, were taken into custody, and after a brief trial, was sent away to Rangoon, the capital of Burma, where he passed away in 1862. And in this way, the Mughal empire, which had been established by Babur in 1526, came finally to its end. At Kanpur, the revolt was led by Nana Sahib. He was helped by Tatia Tope. On 27 June, the rebellious soldiers surrounded the members of the British community. Nana Sahib had kept some boats ready for them so that they could be sent away from Kanpur. But as they were stepping into the boats, Indian soldiers arrived there. Indian soldiers came to know that the British had killed their brothers at Varanasi and Allahabad. They got very angry and they opened fire on the British. Nana Sahib Nana Sahib celebrated this victory over the Firangis, over the Englishmen, but this joy was short-lived because General Havelock came to Kanpur soon and defeated Nana Sahib. It is believed that Nana Sahib ran away to jungle in Nepal. After Nana Sahib fled, after the defeat of Nana Sahib on 6 December 1857, his general Tatia Tope. Now see, before discussing Tatia Tope, we shall talk about Lucknow. In Lucknow, the revolt was led by Begum Hazrat Mahal, who was one of the wives of Wajid Ali Shah. It was on September 20, Lucknow passed into the hands of the Indian soldiers on 30th May, and it was regained by the British generals, General Outram and Havelock, on September 20. Tatia Tope teamed up with the Rani of Jhansi. The Rani of Jhansi, taking this opportunity, rebelled against the British. The British surrounded the fort of Jhansi. She somehow managed to escape on horseback. She teamed up with Tatia Tope and captured the fort of Gwalior. But again, their victory did not last long, because in the battle that was fought on 17th June 1858, where the British troops were led by Sir Hugh Rose, the Rani of Jhansi was defeated and she died a soldier's death on the battlefield. Tatya Tope wandered for some time from place to place, but finally he was caught and hanged on 18th April 1859 in the presence of a large crowd. Among the other leaders, we may mention Kunwar Singh, a Rajput who owned vast estates at Ara and Jagdishpur near Patna. There were similar uprisings in Gaya and also Ranchi. So these are the events in brief that took place during the Great Revolt of 1857. Now the next part of the chapter is the causes of failure of the rebellion. Why did the rebellion fail? Now this is also out of your syllabus. So we shall go to the next important part, that is the next part of the chapter which is within your syllabus, that is the results of the Great Revolt of 1857. The most important result was, you must remember, till 1857, India was not directly ruled by the British government. India was ruled by the East India Company, and the British government controlled the activity of the East India Company to a certain extent with the help of the Board of Directors, with the help of the Board of Control and the Court of Directors. But now the British government decided that it was not safe to give the responsibility of governing such a vast country as India in the hands of a business company, and therefore by the act of it passed an act, the British Parliament passed an act on 2nd August 1858. The name of the act is an Act for the Better Government of India, and by this act the responsibility of governing India now passed into the hands of directly into the hands of the British government. This act transferred India, the government of India, from the hands of the company to the crown. India was now to be governed in the name of the King or Queen of England. At that time, the Queen of England was Queen Victoria. The Board of Control and the Court of Directors was abolished. In their place, a minister was appointed who was given the title the Secretary of State. This minister was a part of the British cabinet, and it was his responsibility to look after affairs in India. The Secretary of State was helped by a council of 15 members known as the India Council, and the salary of the Secretary of State was paid from the revenues of India. The practice of appointing sons of noble families to high posts in India, that was practiced, during the during the rule of the East India Company. It was the heirs or the sons of the noble family of the British nobility that were mostly appointed to the various high posts in India, or they were arbitrarily appointed by the East India Company. Now, such appointments were to be made by selecting the candidates through the civil service. Now, a civil service examination started, and the members of the civil service, that is the officers who were to serve in India, were selected through this civil service. Lastly, the Governor General of India now also received the title of the Viceroy. The word Viceroy means the representative of the King or Queen. Lord Canning was the last Governor General of the East India Company and also the first Viceroy of India. Queen Victoria declared, there was a proclamation made by Queen Victoria in 1858. It was read out by Lord Canning in a grand darbar that was held in 1858. In this proclamation, which is called the Queen's Proclamation, Queen Victoria assured all the kings and princes of India that the British would henceforth make no attempt to increase their borders in India. And the British government would honor all the treaties that had been signed between the Indian princes and the East India Company earlier. The British government took every step. Okay. Now see, the Queen also assured the Indians that Indians would be assured, would be appointed to higher posts. I'll just go to another point again. Since Nana Sahib had fled India, the Peshwa of the post of the Peshwa was abolished forever, and after the death of Bahadur Shah, the title of the Mughal emperor was also came to an end. The Queen promised that the British would not interfere with the religious beliefs of the Indians anymore. She assured that all the Indians would be given equal treatment as the Europeans, and all appointments in India would be made strictly according to education, ability, and integrity of the person. All the people were given pardon. All the people who took part in the Great Rebellion were pardoned, except those who were involved with killing of Europeans. The proclamation ended with a promise given by the Queen that the British government would henceforth act to bring about the moral and economic advancement of the people of India. See, after the Great Rebellion, the British government found it very necessary to reorganize the army in India. The policy of balance and counter check was introduced. The number of English soldiers compared to Indian soldiers was vastly increased. The artillery division, Indians were now appointed only to the infantry and the cavalry, and no Indian was appointed to the artillery division or those divisions which handled the most effective weapons of warfare. Indian soldiers belonging to different castes and creeds were now mixed up so that a feeling of unity could not arise among them. Despite all the promises, despite all the rosy promises that were made to the Indians, most of them were not kept. The policy of non-intervention, the policy of not playing with the social and religious customs of India was maintained. Although this did not do any good to India, because many of the superstitions that had to be removed now remained in place. So, reformation of the society, the reforming activity of society, the role of the government, the role that a responsible government must play in reforming the society, that role was declined. The British government declined to play that role. The British realized one of the biggest lessons that the Great Rebellion had taught the British was that if the Hindus and Muslims of India came together, they were certainly not secure. So now they adopted the policy of divide and rule. They adopted the policy of keeping the Hindus so that they could safely rule in India. See, during the Great Revolt, Nana Sahib, Tatya Tope, Rani of Jhansi, Kunwar Singh, they were Hindu leaders. On the other hand, Bahadur Shah, who was a Mughal emperor, the Muslim, both the Hindus and Muslim sepoys, recognized him as the ruler or emperor of India. So both the Hindus and Muslims had combined to fight the British during the Great Rebellion. And so that such a thing did not happen again, the British now conspired in many ways to divide the Indian society and keep the Hindus and Muslims away from each other. The policy of economic exploitation, the policy of exploitation of India continued. First of all, the number of Englishmen in India, both private individuals and member of the services, increased. The civil servants and military officers both earned a high salary. The salary of the Secretary of State and the members of the Indian councils were paid from the revenues of India, and this drained the resources of India. Secondly, India was turned into a typical colonial economy. That is, India became a land which only exported raw materials. The British made hardly any effort to set up production units in India or to encourage Indian industries. They were only interested in exporting raw materials from India and dumping the finished products in the Indian market. So the money that the Indian people used to buy these British goods again went back to England. Thirdly, the peasants suffered a lot under the new revenue policies, and very soon they became indebted to money lenders. मतलब बहुत उनको टैक्स देने के लिए महाजन से या मनी लेंडर से पैसा उधार लेना पड़ा था, और किसान उधार के तले किसान दब गए. Lastly, the British capitalists, the moneyed British men, they invested their extra capital in India in railways, in setting up tea, coffee, rubber plantations, in opening coal mines and jute mills and shippings. And Indians had to pay heavy interest and dividends on the capital invested in India. But out of all these bad things, one good thing emerged, and that is, see, because of the introduction of Western education, those Indians who received Western education came into contact with the history of the West, with modern European history. They came into contact with modern political ideas like equality, liberty, fraternity, and so on. And they soon realized the true nature of the British rule in India, and they realized that for the good of the country, the British, they would have to protest, raise their voice, and throw the British out of India. From this emerged a spirit of nationalism which gradually led to the growth of the national movement and finally the departure of the British from India in 1947. So this is this chapter, my dear students. Please go through it line by line. Anywhere where you have problem, you are free to call me up and ask me whatever problem. I shall again explain if you have any problem anywhere. Thank you very much.